There's a lot of concern with some of the rhetoric from the incoming administration, and some of it valid rhetoric. Concerns about Canadian defense spending, which has been nowhere near the 2% target. How critical, Senator Risch, do you think this issue is going to be with the Trump administration?
Really critical. He's been very critical of all of the allies who weren't stepping up. And look, this is something we all agreed to. NATO is incredibly important to Canada, to the United States, to the other 30 countries.
NATO's patience with Canada is running out. Sources reveal secret meetings where top officials discuss kicking Canada out for the first time in the alliance's history. Justin Trudeau's leadership is under fire as Canada fails to meet its NATO obligations. With threats from Russia looming, can Canada step up before it's too late? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. NATO's secret emergency meetings about Canada have sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. High-ranking officials are discussing the unthinkable, kicking Canada out of the alliance.
How are you allowed to do that when you're on the way out? Like, the people don't want you to be there anymore. There should be like some sort of a pause for like significant actions that could potentially start World War III. They fired an intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time ever. It's the first time one of those has ever been used. Maybe that would be a good thing that we would like to avoid from a dying former president. The whole thing is nuts.
I mean, look, I don't know shit about politics.
Zelensky says Putin is terrified.
This unprecedented move highlights just how far Canada's reputation has fallen within NATO. Once seen as a reliable partner, Canada's image is now tarnished by broken promises and military shortcomings. The gap between Canada's commitments and actions has widened to a chasm that NATO can no longer ignore. Justin Trudeau's government pledged to increase defense spending, but the reality on the ground tells a different story. U.S. Congressman Mike Turner didn't mince words when he called out Canada's military failings. He pointed to urgent needs for investment in equipment and training, emphasizing that Canada's inability to field modern aircraft like F-35s is a major concern. While countries like Norway are advancing their capabilities, Canada is lagging behind, putting strain on the alliance's collective defense strategy. The Canadian military's equipment shortage has become a glaring issue. Outdated gear and insufficient resources have left Canada's armed forces ill-prepared to face modern threats. This lack of readiness isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. NATO allies are growing increasingly frustrated with Trudeau's leadership, seeing it as a weak link in the chain of Western security.
Is the consequence for those allies who aren't in the structure, within the structure of the alliance? Like, will anything happen?
Well, currently there is not, and that's really the sad part is that those countries who see no consequences have just decided not to live up to it. Well, every country has additional items that they do. Certainly the United States does, Germany does, but I think here for Canadians, they should look just to their own performance of their military. You know, the Canadian military has in so many areas, not just in the 2%. Tomorrow, if he decides to attack England or London, Canada is not able to rise to its obligations in NATO to help defend England.
As global tensions rise, particularly with an aggressive Russia, NATO's patience is wearing thin. The alliance can't afford to have a member that can't pull its weight. Emergency meetings have been convened to address the issue of member states not meeting their defense commitments, with Canada squarely in the crosshairs. The consequences of Canada's failures could be severe. Diplomatic repercussions loom large, with leaked comments suggesting that Canada's role within NATO could be drastically altered if the situation doesn't improve. The alliance is considering an ultimatum: step up or step out. This crisis leaves Trudeau in a precarious position. How will he respond to NATO's pressure? Can he turn Canada's military fortunes around before it's too late? The world watches as Canada teeters on the brink of a humiliating expulsion from one of the most powerful military alliances in history. As NATO's pressure mounts, Justin Trudeau's response has left many Canadians shaking their heads in disbelief. While the country faces a potential NATO expulsion, the Prime Minister was spotted at a Taylor Swift concert. This bizarre contrast between international crisis and pop culture indulgence raises serious questions about Trudeau's priorities and leadership style.
I mean, that was just appalling in itself, but what's even more appalling is where was the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? Well, he was actually dancing at a Taylor Swift concert.
Well, I have to clarify, there's no crime in dancing at a Taylor Swift concert because I'd be guilty of the same offence, even though those moves are partly criminal, the ones that I saw just there. But
Trudeau's history of prioritizing social issues and domestic policies over defense concerns has finally caught up with him. For years, he's downplayed the importance of military spending, calling NATO's 2% GDP target arbitrary. This stance has put Canada at odds with its allies and exposed a dangerous neglect of national security. The Prime Minister's carefully crafted public image as a progressive, globally minded leader is crumbling under the harsh realities of international politics. While Trudeau's charm offensive worked wonders in the past, it's falling flat as NATO allies demand concrete action, not empty promises. The world has changed, but Trudeau's playbook remains stuck in a bygone era. Trudeau's domestic political challenges are only making matters worse. He's caught between a rock and a hard place: increase military spending and face backlash from his left-leaning base, or continue to neglect defense and risk Canada's standing on the world stage. This paralysis is crippling Canada's ability to meet its NATO commitments and leaving the country vulnerable. Political experts are sounding the alarm on Trudeau's foreign policy failures. His focus on soft power and diplomatic niceties has left Canada unprepared for the harsh realities of global conflict. As Russia flexes its military muscle and China expands its influence, Canada's military weakness is becoming a liability not just for the country, but for the entire Western alliance. The potential political fallout for Trudeau is massive. His Liberal government is already on shaky ground, and a NATO expulsion could be the final nail in the coffin. Opposition parties are seizing on this crisis, painting Trudeau as an incompetent leader who's jeopardizing Canada's national security. But the most damning indictment comes from the Canadian people themselves. Recent polls show a significant shift in public opinion, with growing concern over national security and a desire for increased defense spending. Canadians are waking up to the dangers of Trudeau's neglect and they're demanding action. As global security threats loom larger, Canada finds itself at a crossroads. Will Trudeau finally heed the warnings and take decisive action to strengthen Canada's military, or will he continue to fiddle while Rome burns, leaving Canada exposed and isolated on the world stage? Canada's position in the global security landscape is on a knife's edge. NATO's patience is running out, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Trudeau's leadership has left our nation exposed and vulnerable to threats from all sides. The time for half measures and empty promises is over. Canadians, we can't afford to sit idly by while our country's reputation crumbles. We must demand real accountability from our leaders. Call your MPs, flood their offices with letters, and make your voices heard. Our future security depends on it. If drastic changes aren't made soon, Canada faces a grim future. Kicked out of NATO, isolated on the world stage, and at the mercy of aggressive powers like Russia and China. The clock is ticking. Will Canada step up and reclaim its place as a respected global player, or fade into irrelevance? The choice is ours.